When oppression becomes law, resistance becomes duty. This quote stands true for the Tibetan freedom struggle against the Chinese occupation. This reflects the collective spirit of the Tibetan identity that will be on display during the Tibetan Uprising Day held on March 10th. This day is observed annually as a day to celebrate the unshaken determination of the Tibetan community throughout the world. Every year, March 10th comes with heartbreaking stories of oppression suffered by Tibetans. This shall be a reminder for the world regarding the true ugly face of China. And as humans, we must speak up against the occupation and systematic subjugation of the ethnic identity of the Tibetans in China. In this episode, we'll shed some light on the historic significance of Tibetan Uprising Day. Furthermore, we'll highlight the cultural genocide committed by China in Tibet, which is under Chinese occupation. Tibetan Uprising Day marks the anniversary of the 1959 Tibetan Uprising against Chinese rule. On March 10, 1959, thousands of Tibetans in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, gathered to protest against the Chinese government's presence in their country. The protest was triggered by fears that the Chinese authorities were planning to abduct the Dalai Lama, Tibet's spiritual leader, who had been negotiating with Chinese officials, but was increasingly at odds with their policies. The demonstration escalated into a full-scale uprising, with Tibetans demanding independence and the departure of Chinese forces from Tibet. The Chinese military responded with force, leading to violence and bloodshed. The Dalai Lama fled into exile in India, where he established a government in exile. Since then, Tibetan Uprising Day has been observed annually by Tibetans and supporters around the world to remember those who lost their lives during the uprising and to voice against Chinese oppression against Tibet. Tibetan Uprising Day holds significant importance for Tibetans. It marks a pivotal moment in their history and ongoing struggle for autonomy. The day symbolizes the resilience and determination of the Tibetan people in resisting Chinese rule and advocating for their cultural, religious, and political rights. For Tibetans, the events of March 10, 1959, are a powerful reminder of the sacrifices made by those who stood against oppression and the subsequent exile of the Dalai Lama. Observing Tibetan Uprising Day helps maintain awareness of the continued challenges faced by Tibetans, both inside Tibet and in exile. It serves as a platform for expressing solidarity, raising international awareness about the situation in Tibet, and calling for the respect of human rights and self-determination. In essence, Tibetan Uprising Day is a poignant annual occasion for Tibetans to unite, remember their history, and voice their aspirations for a free and autonomous Tibet. The situation in Tibet has been marked by reports of human rights abuses and cultural oppression. One notable aspect is the Chinese government's restrictions on religious freedom, particularly affecting Tibetan Buddhism. Monasteries and religious practices have faced intense scrutiny and control. Several Tibetan monasteries have been reportedly destroyed or damaged by Chinese authorities. It is done as part of government policies aimed at exerting control over Tibetan religious and cultural institutions. Some notable monasteries include Larung Gar Buddhist Academy. It is located in Sertar County, Sichuan Province. Larung Gar was one of the largest and most influential Tibetan Buddhist centers in the world. In recent years, Chinese authorities have carried out demolitions and evictions at Larung Gar, reducing the size of the monastic complex and displacing thousands of monks and nuns. Similar to Larung Gar, Yakan Gar is located in Gar's Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture, Sichuan Province. It has been subjected to government-led demolitions and restrictions on its size and population. The site, known for its large population of monks and nuns, has been significantly reduced to half. China has imposed a lockdown on the 7 monasteries along the 2 banks of eastern Tibet's Drichu River, which it is set to demolish to make way for a massive hydropower dam project in Deji County of Sichuan Province, as reported by the Tibetan service of RFA.org. More than 1,000 monks and other local Tibetans have been arrested over February 22 to 23 after they petitioned the authorities as well as held protests since February 14 to seek a halt to the project. China has reportedly released around 20 monks, each on February 26 and 27. But the brutal ill treatment of the vast majority still under arrest continues while tight restrictions on movement and control over communication channels have been imposed over the county. One of the main reasons for the release of the Tibetans is the growing media coverage abroad of the mass arrests that have taken place. One source has told RFA.org. Located near Lhasa, Ganden Monastery is one of the most important Gelug monasteries in Tibet. It has a long history dating back to the 15th century. During the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s and 1970s, Ganden Monastery suffered extensive damage and destruction, After almost 50 years, it has still not regained its former prominence. These are just a few examples. There are likely many other Tibetan monasteries that have faced similar challenges under Chinese rule. The destruction or damage to these monasteries represents not only the loss of religious and cultural heritage, but also the suppression of Tibetan identity and autonomy. This led to the forced displacement of Tibetan monks. The forced displacement and resettlement of Tibetan monks, aimed at transforming their traditional way of life, is another well-documented aspect. These policies often disrupt communities and erode cultural practices tied to the nomadic lifestyle. The self-immolation protest, tales of courage and desperation. Self-immolation protest is a form of extreme protest where individuals deliberately set themselves on fire as a powerful and often desperate expression of dissent or resistance. Tibetans, particularly monks, nuns, and other individuals, have resorted to self-immolation as a method of protesting Chinese policies in Tibet. It highlights the severity of the situation and the extent of barbarity inflicted upon the Tibetans. Tibetan self-immolation protests are aimed at expressing grievances related to issues such as religious repression, cultural assimilation, political suppression, and the denial of basic human rights. The protesters often call for greater autonomy for Tibet and the return of the Dalai Lama. These tragic acts are intended to draw attention to the plight of Tibetans under Chinese rule. The Chinese government has consistently concealed self-immolation protests. It has sought to control information about such incidents, making it challenging to obtain transparent details. However, some notable instances include Tapi, a monk, set himself on fire in 2009 in Ngaba, Aba, in the Tibetan region. His act was captured on video and spread widely, drawing international attention. In 2012, Sangye Gyatso, also known as Tenzin Phuntsok, self-immolated in front of a police station in Ngaba. His act was followed by a series of self-immolations in the same area. Palden Choetso, a nun, self-immolated in Tawu, Daofu County, calling for religious freedom and the return of the Dalai Lama. Although not inside Tibet, Jamphal Yeshi self-immolated in New Delhi during a protest against the visit of Chinese President Hu Jintao. He succumbed to his injuries. These self-immolations reflect the deep frustration and despair felt by Tibetans in response to Chinese policies. These oppressive policies are particularly regarding religious freedom, cultural repression, and political autonomy. The acts are a stark expression of protest against what many see as oppressive conditions. Tibetan Uprising Day is not only a moment of remembrance, but also a call for international awareness and support in advocating for the rights and freedoms of the Tibetan people. Unfortunately, in a world where interest proceeds with humanity, the Tibetan voice is seldom heard by the international community. Every passing year reminds us of the shallowness of international laws in preventing human rights violations. Nonetheless, it's quite remarkable and inspiring to witness the struggles and resistance of Tibetans in putting forth their tales of oppression despite getting little attention. However, on this day of remembrance, we must spread their words and spread awareness against the subjugation and cultural genocide of Tibetan identity by China. So this is it for today's episode. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. Remember, stay inspired, stay curious, and we will catch you in the next video.